This is James. Welcome to Vintage Bricks. 16 factions of castle sets in 35 years. I'm going to try to make our journey fun, but we'll go over this in 3 different ways: short, medium, and long. And after all 3, hopefully you feel like, yeah, you're a castle expert. Well, for the quick overview, it's a list. Now, can't get any quicker than that. Let's go slow it down a little bit here. So the x-axis in our graph is the years, and then we'll start listing the sets from bottom left to top right. So let's begin with the classic castle set. Then next came the Lion Knights, then the Black Falcons, then the Forestmen, and then to round out the century, the Black Knights. Starting in the 1990s, we have the Wolfpack starting, then the Dragon Masters, the Royal Knights, the Dark Forest sets, the Fright Knights, the Ninja. I mean, Lego just kept pumping these out. The Knights Kingdom, the Knights Kingdom 2, and next is the Fantasy era, which of a faction was huge. Then the Kingdom sets, which everybody loves, including me, and then the Castle sets. And we'll slow down a little bit and do a little slower journey through these exciting 16 factions. Enjoy the ride. The first is the Classic Castle faction in 1978, and it ran to about 1983, had 3 sets. The most famous was the Yellow Castle. That really got the ball rolling. Then in 1984, the Lion Knights faction started. There was a couple notable sets. One was the initial Castle set, which was the 6080, and then another one, which was very well received, was the 6067 or Guarded In set, and they ran for about 6-7 years, so very popular faction. Then the second main faction released in 1984 was the Black Falcons faction. They had 2 main sets, the 6073 and the 6074, and this faction ran pretty much to the end of the decade also. It's the faction that we'll probably be familiar with because there are sets being released even today of the Black Falcons. In 1987, we had the release of the Forestmen faction. It lasted again till about 1990. A couple main sets. One was the Forestmen's Crossing and the Forestmen's River Fortress. A nice foil to all the castle sets. Then in 1988, we had the Black Knights faction. It was a faction that had 2 main castle sets, the 6085 that was released in 88, and then the 6086, which was a raised base plate, a set that was released in 1992. It had really striking black walls in this faction. Faction is the Wolfpack Renegades, a little bit like the Forestmen, except they were a little less organized and were probably outlaws. In 1993, the Dragon Masters faction started, and this headed us down a more magical path, starting with Magisto the Wizard, who had a pretty impressive array of dragons and knights on his side. Our next faction is the Royal Knights faction that ran from 1995 to 96. It had the first king, castle king, without a crown. The royal king lived in the Royal Knights castle, and they also had the first skeleton. Then in 1996, we have the Dark Forest faction, which was a remake of the Forestmen faction. It had some new torsos here, and it was a short-lived faction with only a few sets. Next, in 1997, we have the Fright Knights, and they were very fantastical and magical and all about the bat. There's Will the Witch and Basil the Bat Lord, and you can see we were really getting into the supernatural here with these sets. And the Ninja factions, which were the Samurai versus the Ninja, and the 1693 was a huge set, and a lot of fun characters here, and a little deviation from some of the other sets, but certainly worthy of the castle theme. The year 2000 brought us the Knights Kingdom set that ran for 6 years. Cedric the Bull, which is the bad guy, versus King Leo, which I assume was the good guy, and Princess Storm, who was a pretty mighty warrior. These sets were beginning to kind of go through a juniorization period for Lego. That is that the pieces got a little larger and the build got a little more simplified. Then in 2004, we have the Knights Kingdom 2 set. And this departed a little bit from previous factions in that we had very strong individuals now coming forward, such as Jaco here, who we see who became king. We also had the evil Vladek, whose fortress you can see up the top left up there, and King Mathis, and had a dragon. So it was a pretty busy time. This ran for till 2006. In 2007, Lego went all out on the Fantasy Era faction. It was really broken into maybe 4 separate sub-factions. We had the Crown Knights, nice castle there with them. Skeleton Warriors, they had their own ship. We had the Trolls, they had their own fort and their own ship. And then we had the Dwarves, who were, didn't get along necessarily with the Trolls. The Fantasy Era really had a little bit of something for everybody who loves the castle theme, myself included. In 2010, we have our next faction is the Kingdom faction that had the Red Lion Kingdom versus the Dragon Kingdom. And so it was man versus man. We get a little away from the fantasy here. Really wonderful sets. In 2013, this is our last faction we're going to review. It's the Castle faction. It's the Blue Lion Knights versus the Red Dragons. And this pretty much wraps up our review. My long-term goal at Vintage Bricks is actually to review all the sets in all these factions as time goes on. And so stay tuned, and if you get a chance, please subscribe. Thank you for visiting Vintage Bricks.